Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. First of all, man la yashkur nas la yashkur Allah. We have that saying in Arabic, Islamic saying, that those who don't thank the people don't thank Allah. So I wanted to give thanks to those who responded to the different types of inquiries that I put out. A number, you know who you are. There's been a number of people that I've been asking different questions with regard to how they see relationships, or how they see certain situations and scenarios that have to do with relationships. One thing that I want to say is that, first of all, I don't want to characterize our community as being broken per se. I don't want to characterize us as being broken. But I do want to say that there's a certain set of challenges that we face. And here in specific, I'm talking about, the black and brown communities. And I want to limit it to that. I can include other communities, especially within the Muslim framework, in that, but I want to simplify it. And I think doing it this way, people will take benefit regardless. First of all, we have to really look at how it is that we characterize ourselves. Do we characterize ourselves as being people of strength and being people that have the ability to overcome situations? Or do we characterize ourselves as just being broken and being people that are completely oppressed? That doesn't mean that we're not oppressed. I'm not saying that there's no oppression. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I remember one time, some years back, and actually I got this idea from the hip hop community, and I thought it was extremely insightful. And this is why I think we should be always open to what's out there as far as concepts and ideas, because it may be the case that there may be something that's put out there that will help us benefit. And I remember one time there was this one 5%er. He was right, and actually he's a Bangladeshi 5%er from the Midwest, which I thought was interesting. And he wrote a book. He was writing a book, and I could appreciate that he was doing the whole do for yourself type of concept. And he was writing a book, and the book that he was writing was about revolt. It was about the revolts of those who had been basically enslaved, and how they basically were people that refused to be enslaved. And so in marketing the book, he talked about the whole issue of needing to revise history and to have an understanding of how it is that history unfolds, because it's not the case that, for instance, people that were enslaved, that they just, they were passively were like, okay, fine, no problem. I'll be your slave. There's no resistance or anything like that. That wasn't the psychology at all. So he started talking about, the whole idea of what it means to have that within your mental framework. And it's true. If you analyze, if we were to have a discussion about slavery from the angle of slave revolts and rebellions and revolutions, like the Haitian Revolution and all the uprisings that took place, I guarantee you will have a completely different concept of how we understand slavery. We won't understand slavery as just one group, overcoming another group, but then we will understand one group trying to overcome another group, but the second group, giving them, hell on earth for disregarding their humanity. So it's the same thing with how we characterize ourselves in general. So people, they live, there are certain segments of our community that they live in less than ideal situations, economically and environmentally and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of challenges that come along with living in a capitalist society. And at one time, there was a figure put out, and this was during the Clinton administration, of what would it take, how much money would it take to have a basic life in the U.S. And it was something like about almost like 100,000. And basically, the concept was that you would have to live in a certain zip code. The concept was that you needed to live like in a stable middle class neighborhood where you have access to a certain level of education, you have access to a certain level of security, and you have access to a certain type of environment, which it has an impact on you psychologically, right? And so there's cleanliness, there's nature, all that type of stuff. You have the ability to walk without feeling threatened. And so, there's things that are understood in the system about how you can function and how do you grow and how do you cultivate yourself. And so a lot of people, they live in less than stellar conditions, but they have this strong ability to overcome those situations that they're in. I'm saying all of that to say that, when we talk about relationships, we may see a lot of situations of brokenness, and we shouldn't deny that that's there. But we also have to see that what kind of conditions are people living in and what kind of obstacles it is that they're overcoming. That's the first point, because when we can appreciate how it is that people overcome their challenges, then we start to have a regard for them. When I was doing social work, one of the things that came along in social work training was that you should, and I was doing social work for the state, and I was trained as an investigator, and I ended up working in services. There were two parts, at least in some social service agencies. One was the investigation part, which basically is almost like, you're trying to see if there's any liability. And then the other part is, services, what kind of services you put in to help people. And so one of the things that training gives is that, and I mentioned this before, is that it looks at where people are with regard to their strengths. We have to look at ourselves and each other like that. That doesn't mean that we're going to be able to easily deal with each other, because we have a lot of challenges which are in the community, and that doesn't mean we're problem people. That's why I was trying to make all these disclaimers. I don't want us to look at ourselves as problem people, no. But there are challenges, right? And there are situations that come up when you're struggling with paying, your utility bills, and you don't know if you're going to get a shut-off notice or not, because you don't know where you're going to get the income from. Or there are issues that come up when you have to duck bullets, and the issues that come up, when you're in an apartment building or a house that's that has lead-based paint, and you really can't afford to go anywhere else, or your neighbors suck, the way that they deal with you, and there's arguing all the time, and there's environmental challenges. Wealth, what it does is it allows you to remove yourself from some of those challenges, and then you have another set of challenges, right? And so all those challenges that come up in our environments, they impinge, they put pressure on our relationships. And then we have family issues that come up. How is it that family things come up? Like sometimes you may be taking care of a parent or a grandparent, and you don't have, necessarily a nurse or whatever. And so there's a stress from that, of being that person that's devoted. Or sometimes you may be taking care of your nephews and nieces because your sibling may not be, all there, whatever it may be. There's a lot of challenges. And again, I don't want us to look at ourselves as problems, but this has to be said because, we are expecting from relationships. And there was one counselor theorist that was talking about this point. Sometimes we're expecting certain ideal things from relationships that just don't exist. And so what we do is we put these expectations on each other, and rather than being, and this is where we have to be open as Muslims and say, like, there's certain things that we have to learn. Indigenous Muslims have to realize, like, there's certain things even that come from the conscious community that are very important for us to understand. Like, we have to learn how to heal each other. And that's like a statement that Queen Afua has said from New York. The whole process of learning how to be in relationships to heal each other. We may not agree with her approach 100%, but with that concept, I agree with that 100%. With the idea of learning how to heal each other. And so if we're in that process of trying to heal each other, we have to acknowledge where each other's strengths are, but we also have to acknowledge what it is that we're dealing with. That's a challenge. And I say this because without being able to have stabilized relationships, or at least relationships in which we can function, we may not be at the highest level or plateau, but if you don't have that, our community is going to be difficult to really move forward, right? And so we have to be realistic. Some of the things that people are expecting from each other are not realistic. And when that concept is not there of let's build together, let's heal each other, having that understanding that there's real struggles is almost impossible. for us to get out of these situations that we're in when it comes to problems in relationships, because people are expecting to see situations that are not there. Like I hear, there's some Muslim sisters, I'll give you an example. The first thing that they're dealing with when it comes to marriage, the first thing that they're dealing with, and it's almost toxic to me at this point, is they say, well, I wish brothers, they just would, be responsible and pay the bills and this and that. And so you start thinking to yourself, did you check the unemployment rate? When was the last time you checked the unemployment rate for people in our community? When was the last time you checked the unemployment rate for people in our community that happen to be males? When was the last time that you checked, the disparities, the economic disparities? So there's like sometimes this expectation of certain things to be in place, and it's like you're ignoring that there's challenges in the society. Okay, you may say, well, that individual person, they can advance themselves. Well, there's psychological challenges as well. And so some people say, well, I'm not here to baby anybody. I'm not here to baby a man, or, but that becomes part of the issue. That when we go into relationships from the beginning, we should be clear on the fact that we're trying to build with each other. We should be clear on what it is that is happening. So if you go in thinking that a person, like in the case of a female, that brother has potential, you signed up for that. You signed up knowing that brother had potential. Now, when the challenges come, you don't want to deal with that. And it's the same thing with the brother that marries the sister with children, and you saw potential in the sister, and you see that there may be some issues there, but you're signing up for that, and you're saying, I may be able to deal with that. The more difficult out of these situations, I think, is a scenario that I haven't mentioned. When we start dealing with mental health, and actually this whole live is only because of this. When we start dealing with mental health in relationships, and then we deal with the brunt of it, and we like, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to deal with depression. I didn't sign up to deal with anxiety. I didn't sign up to deal with bipolar. I didn't sign up for this. I heard of a case recently. One of the young sisters, she studied actually Islam, and I considered her to be, a teacher in Islam. She was basically telling me about a scenario of a brother who was married to a sister, and they had some issues with each other. Come to find out, the sister had a leakage from her brain that was affecting her behavior, and it was not known that she had that leakage. Now imagine what types of problems they were facing, and so that, and I always say this, but I say this once again, like, if we're going to deal with our reality as a community, we have to take our reality as a whole, our political reality. There's a hell of a lot of anxiety that a lot of people go through when they're thinking about getting shot up by the cops if they're, going into the public sphere. There's a lot of anxiety that young men experience when they're in the inner cities. In those areas, there's potential violence. I remember myself coming from an urban environment. I didn't really realize the impact until I went to Egypt. And I had an idea because I was always between Philly and Jersey. And I understood what it was like to live in a suburb and to be in the hood, and different parts of the hood. Was the difference between being in the projects and being in another area of the city, or a better area of the city. But it was when I went to Egypt that somebody was running, and I pulled to the side and I cocked my hand like ready to punch. Then I realized, and I stopped myself. I'm like, bro, it's like that environment of being in a big city and living in that environment of Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, that instilled in you certain realities that you instinctually respond. But it took for me to go across the world for myself to be in tune to that. Not that the theory is not there. A lot of us have the theory.